next speaker, who is Paul Quinn. I'd like to introduce Paul. He's a postdoctoral fellow in the School of English, and his interests lie in the culture of early modern Sussex, in religion, politics, and early modern drama. So I shall pass over to Paul.
Okay, so I am midway through a 3-year postdoc, which is funded by the Higher Education Innovation Fund, to put on an exhibition on early modern Sussex. This is early modern Sussex. This is John Speed's map from 1610. Some of us in the School of English had been doing some work on early modern Sussex prior to this funding becoming available. We did a one-day event in Chichester 3 years ago now, I think, and there's a volume of essays which is coming out on the back of that event, which is due out in September. And Matt Dimmock, in the introduction, talks about this map, in that the map itself is quite problematic. They've had to squeeze, contort the county, and just the figures who are listed here includes Philip Howard, who, of course, as we know, dies in the Tower of London on a treason charge, though he's not. It's an odd definition of sainthood, given he probably dies of dysentery. So there's some suggestion that he was actually poisoned. And the point of this really was to make people think differently about Sussex, that we have perhaps an idea of what Sussex is based on our own experiences of it as a commuter belt, areas of quite affluent parts of the county, but also areas where there's quite obvious pockets of poverty, particularly along the coast. Whereas in the early modern period, it's a very, very different place. It's split religiously, so the eastern half of the county is quite radically Protestant. The western half remains quite Catholic until very late in the period, in part because of the number of recent families that are there who are protecting it. It's an area where there's heavy industry, so of course those of us who have been following the fracking protests over the summer, it's quite clear there's a lacuna there in people's knowledge about the history of the county and the role heavy industry plays in the county, but also how that heavy industry impacts in a particularly malign fashion on the county. So if we think about Rye, down here is the second richest town in the county in the early modern period. Its economy then collapses in the 16th century because the harbour silts up. And in part it silts up because of the deforestation that's taking place further up in the county. Deforestation is taking place in order to feed the iron industry. So of course there would be an obvious way to, wanted to protest against potential fracking in Balcombe, look to the past of the county to say how this heavy industry helped to wreck the county's economy in part in the past. Figures like Michael Drayton, an early modern poet, but he's also some kind of early modern ecological writer, is warning about deforestation in the 16th century and the damage that is being done to the county. And you find it turning up in interesting documents as well. So a figure like John True, who's probably from round Rye, although possibly in Kent, who's this strange Protestant free willer in the 1550s, who's in prison in the King's Bench with Sussex Protestants who are all pretty hardline predestinarians, including probably Richard Woodman, who was burnt in Lewes in 1557. You see in True's letters, which are preserved partly in Fox, but also in Clement's book on free radicalism in the 16th century, where he makes use of this idea of the iron industry as an analogy for why he doesn't believe in free will. That he doesn't believe in predestination, rather, because if you argue for predestination, God is the cause of people being damned, in the same way that deforestation is not the desired end product of the iron industry. It just happens as an outcome. So you see these interesting cross connections between religion and literature, expressed in literature, and the iron industry. So the exhibition itself was meant to take place in Chichester Cathedral, though of course if you know Chichester, you know it's a very long way down from here. And of course this is a problem for the early modern period as well. So you find across the period, particularly in the 1570s when Richard Curtis is Bishop of Chichester, he can't stamp his authority on the county. In the west he's facing with Wrexham families who just won't conform, and over in the east he's got a radical type of Protestantism that he's really not comfortable with, but he can't stamp his authority on the county because Chichester is just so far down. The roads in the county are particularly bad. You find accounts of this letters to the Privy Council going all the way into the 18th century, just how bad the roads are in the county, and that it becomes essentially impassable until the 18th century when the toll roads come in, and that's when you're forcing people to pay for the roads. Again, the iron industry takes the blame for this because they're moving these heavy carts onto these bad roads and the roads are collapsing beneath them. That's why you find the assizes take place in Horsham over in the middle of the county and up in East Grinstead, because the judges just won't travel further down in the county. You find letters where they just won't go any further down because they can't and they're afraid of getting stuck down there. So the plan now is to have a series of smaller exhibitions, one in Chichester Cathedral, one in Horsham Museum, one in East Grinstead Museum, and one in Hastings, which means you have a greater scope for people coming, so there's impact implications there, but also you can focus on particular concerns for the particular regions. So in Chichester Cathedral itself, you get the cathedral to tell its own story, because there's a number of architectural features in the cathedral which enable you to explore the complicated religious past in the county, particularly in 1500 to 1700. So that's a Barnard portrait panelling, which shows Bishop Sherborne accepting Henry VIII's assumption of the headship of the Church in England, but also reminding Henry VIII of the historical fact of the cathedral, that it's established during the Saxon period. There's been work done on the panelling recently. On the other side, of course, that's on one side where you have the monarchs. On the other side, you have all the bishops of Chichester. They've all got the same face because it's Bishop Sherborne reminding us that he's paid for the panelling. Karen Coke, who did some of the work on the restoration of the panelling, she's written a chapter in the volume for us. Lambert Barnard, who did the panelling, also did work on the ceilings. He did work in that Sherborne's body. He did work in Boxgrove Priory, which is just up the road from Chichester, and he also did work in Amberley Castle, which was residence of the bishops in that period. The fact that they're living in Amberley, of course, you then use to explore the problems that the bishops of Chichester have with the cathedral chapter. So you find the long-running saga where the bishops just don't get on with the chapters, and so they're not actually living in the town at all. They retreat out into out to Amberley. Sherborne actually loses Amberley. It goes to a royal palace, so he has to move somewhere else then. Chichester's quite a poor diocese as well. It's really low down on the list of dioceses that you want in this period. It's like 19th out of 24, which isn't particularly good at all. So the exhibition itself is based around these key themes which interconnect. Obviously, religious change is connected with this idea of Sussex as a point of entry and exit because of the entry into the country through the county of Huguenot refugees, but also then you have throughout the 1570s, 1580s and 1590s Catholic priests being smuggled back into the country. Strange Tales in Literary Sussex, because of course I'm in the School of English, but actually it's essentially a historical project, but there's some really interesting literary material there. Drayton, as I've already said, the mole appears in texts by Spenser, by Milton, by Pope. Pope has got a connection with the Carroll family, who are down at West Grinstead. Rape of the Lock has its genesis in an approach by John Carroll to Pope to try and smooth over this clash between the Fermors and the Peters, who've all got connections to the county as well. So it's this idea of just exposing the county's past, making it unfamiliar, and making people think about it again. Because obviously the cathedral itself is the centrepiece of that particular part of the exhibition. There's going to be an online presence with a map and a website. So the map itself was up, but it's come down again for some additional material to be put on it. With the programme for the conference, the plan is that there will be QR codes in the programme, so people will be able to scan as they're going around the exhibition. That will take them to the website where there's more information, where the type of material that you find in the archives will be there in greater detail. So because we're aware that there's going to have to be material for a wide range of audience, try and get some children's material in there as well, general audience, but also the more academic reader and audience. So there's a couple of events planned as well, one for June of this year and then something in the run-up to the main part of the exhibition next summer. So I want to now for the rest of the talk about some archive work that I've done, which Fiona, you were saying about how we connect in interesting ways with things. So I've got my kind of serial killer graph at the end of this. Where is it? Yeah, this type of thing. Which, Matt Dimmock did say it looks like you'd find it on a wall of a serial killer. And actually in my office there's a map which is all showing connections across the county. So this type of thing, where you can position a figure like Richard Woodman, who's in the iron industry, and who's recorded in Fox, who writes about himself, so it's his own record which appears in Fox. There's also some letters that survive which are up in the BL of Woodman writing to local Protestant communities, show how important he is. So Richard Woodman is in the iron industry, he's from Buxted, so he almost certainly knows Ralph Hogg, who's also down in Buxted, who's probably the most important iron master of the period. Hogg, in partnership with the French Huguenots, because so much of the iron technology comes from Northern Europe, cast the first cast iron cannon in England. He then subsequently gets the export license because the government discoveries there's massive overproduction of iron in the county, particularly for weapons, and it's being sold off to France and Spain. So there's the interesting possibility that in 1588, when Sussex is preparing for this massive Spanish attack, some of the weapons that they're going to be shot at are produced in Sussex by people like Ralph Hogg. Hogg is an interesting example to show the decline of the iron industry as well, because at the end of the 16th century, Hogg takes a case against his office manager, who he accuses of defrauding him, and although Hogg has made a tremendous amount of money, he's illiterate, so that he hasn't been able to spot the figures of being doctored, and so he's down to about the tune of £80,000 their money, which of course is a massive amount of money, and so there's very little left when he dies. For the purposes of the rest of this talk, of course, the interesting connection is here with Hogg, Philip Henslow, Margaret Henslow, because you can use materials specifically on Sussex, particularly the material that's in various archives, Dulwich College archive, in particular when we're looking at Henslow and Allen, to position Sussex in a wider national story. So Philip Henslow, the theatrical entrepreneur, is from Sussex. He's from Linfield, and his sister Margaret marries Ralph Hogg, and his brother John becomes Hogg's office manager. And Hogg's account book, John Henslow's account book, when you flip it over, is Philip Henslow's diary, the really key theatrical document from the period. If you turn it over, you find at the front just this minutiae about running Ralph Hogg's office. Now, the diary passes into Philip Henslow's hands at some time, we're not sure when, brings it up to London with him, turns it over, and so it becomes this important theatrical document. Henslow, of course, is Edward Allen, the actor's father-in-law, and it's Allen I want to talk about today, because while I was reading Anthony Fletcher's book on Sussex, County in Peace and at War, came across a reference to a murder case between two families, the Shirleys and the Bishops. Now, the Shirleys are based in Wiston, which is over here, north of Bramber. Thomas Shirley was the treasurer for war, the Dutch war, in the 1580s and 1590s, and was fantastically corrupt, was creaming £30,000, no problem, like every month. And Cecil knew this was going on, but couldn't prove it. But eventually they get the evidence. But Shirley potentially gets away with it. He pays a small amount back, £7,000, I think, which is a lot of money in those terms, but not compared to what he's been getting. He does a bit of time in prison, and the debt passes on to his son. So Thomas Shirley's widow is a woman called Anne Shirley, and I found Anne Shirley's will. It's in Kew. I found a transcription of it online, but the actual document itself is at Kew. Anne Shirley, in her will of 1623, leaves a ring to Edward Allen and his wife. And the editors on the Oxford Shakespeare site, where they've got a transcription of the will, suggest that there's the remote possibility that Anne Shirley's request may have been for Edward Allen, the actor. And I thought, well, man, what if it is Edward Allen? So Allen does have Sussex connections, and you can start to build connections between the Shirley family and Allen, often through Henslow. So Allen, as well as being Philip Henslow's son-in-law, has got connections with the county exclusive of Henslow. His father had landholdings in Barnham, Petworth and Yapton, so all over the right side of the county for a connection with Wiston. Henry Fitz-Allen, the 12th Earl of Arundel, certainly supports Allen Senior when the latter is being forced out of the keepership of Bedlam in 1561. So there's another county connection there. Already said about the connection between Allen and Henslow with the iron industry, but they've got further connections with the counties. So at various points in the 1590s, Allen is staying in Broyle Park, just past Lewes. And we know this because the letters survive. Again, it's a Dulwich College, but they're also recorded in full editions of Henslow's diary. And what you find there, they're important for theatrical history because that's the letter. One of the letters to Allen is how we can date when Ben Jonson kills Spencer in the duel. Allen's wife writes to him saying this is happening. But Allen seems to be ill at the time and he's planning on retiring, so he's down in Broyle recovering, and this letter is sent to him telling him about this murder or this duel that's taken place. Other letters show us that Henslow and Allen are desperate to get the revisionship of the mastership of the game, which Henslow's father had in the 1550s, based in Ashdown Forest rather. There's guaranteed finance with that. So while Allen is down in Broyle, he's writing letters to their agent, who's working on their behalf in London. Their agent is a man called Arthur Langsworth, who owns Broyle Park. He's also a debtor. You find his name at various points in Henslow's diary where Henslow's lending him money, because Henslow, of course, is operating some type of bank as well, and he's got massive land holdings. There's a real diversification of the portfolio apparent in Henslow's diary. Not only does it have this connection to the iron industry, but it's showing how Henslow's making money outside of the theatre. So Langsworth has got Broyle Park. He also gets the priory, the parsonage at Firle through Henslow. And so these letters are going back and forth that Langsworth is working on getting this revisionship, and he seems to be having contact with Elizabeth I or with somebody very close to Elizabeth I. So there we've got Allen definitely in the county. His second wife is Constance Dunn. It's John Dunn's daughter. John Dunn is a great friend of Henry King, who will become Bishop of Chichester in the 1630s. Allen meets Constance Dunn through someone called Thomas Chalner, who's the in-law of Arthur Langsworth. So other connections then between Allen and Shirley. Also in the will, where Edward Allen is left this ring, we find a reference to Anne Shirley's grandson, Henry. She leaves him a £40 a year annuity, but there's clearly some concern that Henry's dissolute. So she leaves £300 to her neighbour, Sir Thomas Bishop, with the understanding that he'll pay this annuity to Henry, but if Henry tries to dispose of it by selling it, the annuity is gone. So, in fact, Anne Shirley's probably right to have some concerns about Henry, but not for the reasons that she's thinking, because Henry gets murdered. Well, he's stabbed to death in the street in 1627 because there's an argument with Edward Bishop, who is the grandson of Thomas Bishop, over the money. So clearly there's some type of financial irregularities going on there. This survives in the Privy Council records, but it's dismissed, it's made go away, and Edward Bishop doesn't stand trial for it. What's interesting about Henry Shirley, though, is that he's a playwright. He's got one extant play called The Martyred Soldier, which is performed in 1622 by the Lady Elizabeth's men and by the Palgrave's men. The Palgrave's men is the theatrical company that Allen and Henslow are connected with, because it's the later version of the Admiral's men and Prince Henry's men. It's the reiteration, it's the reincarnation of that troupe. Another connection between Anne Shirley and the theatrical world, Allen in particular, is through Will Kemp, the clown. Anne Shirley's three sons are Anthony, Robert and Thomas, and they all feature in a play from 1607 called The Adventures of the Three English Brothers. They're exploring, they go off to Europe. Thomas Shirley is captured by the Turks, and he writes this fantastically biased and inaccurate history of the Turks while he's in prison. But the play features a cameo by Will Kemp, the clown, based on what Kemp claims is an actual event where he met Anthony Shirley when the latter was in Rome. In the play, it takes place in Venice, but Kemp is adamant this meeting actually took place, and that he approached Shirley based on their kinship. Because Anne Shirley is a Kemp from Kent, and Kemp himself is from Kent, so it's entirely possible that there is a connection there. Alright, so you can build up some type of connection to show that Anne Shirley has got these links to the theatrical world and directly to Henslow's particular world. But then you have to go into the archives to make sure that there's nobody locally who could be the Edward Allen to whom the ring is given. So having spent a fair amount of time in West Sussex Record Office, and I haven't done the Keep yet because it was closing. I'm just getting back on to this after Christmas. Having gone through Wiston and Petworth and Ashurst and all the obvious local parishes, you find that there is an Edward Allen who is mentioned in the Wiston archive, but fortunately he dies in 1608, so he can't have got the ring. There's a reference to Allen's copyhold, which is kind of confusing until you actually get further into the archive and you realise Allen's copyhold is a piece of land. It's not a person at all. There are Richard Allens, there are Walter Allens. There is one other Edward Allen, but he dies as a baby in 1577. There's nobody locally in the extant material who can be the Edward Allen who gets the ring. Now, of course, that's not case proven. I've got to have a look here. But what's interesting about Anne Shirley is she really is fixed in that spot. She won't leave that house, even though it no longer belongs to the Shirleys. Lionel Cranfield leases it, but she just won't leave the house because she says she's owed money. In the end, they persuade her to go, but she only goes as far as Petworth. So she essentially goes up the road. She is fixed upon that part of the county. So it would be odd, possibly, if this ring is going to somebody way up in London or over in Kent. Not impossible, but actually you can start to build up quite a persuasive case based on Allen's connections in the county, connections with the family through the theatre up in London, to show how you can reposition the county in a national context. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.